Good morning, Rabbi Sai. Live from Newark Airport. Says the Heilige Mishnah. Kochi goyim in chayovim aleim mishum pigul noisar v'tamei. A guy is permitted to bring a carbon, and when he does, if the kohen has thoughts of pigul that he's going to eat this carbon in a week from now, you're not chayiv kares. If you leave it overnight, you're not chayiv kares for noisar. If you are tamei and you eat the guy's carbon, you're not chayiv. Here's the pasuk. It says, "Ish mi beis Yisrael u'minager b'Yisrael asher yakrav karbonu l'chol dreim l'chol d'voisam asher yakriv l'Hashem la'ila." From here, the Gemara darshans. This went on. This is on. They're able to see because over here. Okay, yeah, I see it over there. Shkoyach. Zog the Gemara. V'ashoichat ha'machot patur. And if you take this carbon of the guy, you bring it outside of the Beis Hamikdash, and you shecht it, you patur. Divrei Rebbe Shimon. Rabbi Yosi mechayev, and Rabbi Yosi says no. As we're going to see in the Gemara, Rabbi Yosi says that a guy's carbon is like a Jew's carbon. There's noisar, there's pigul, there's tumah, there's shkita bachutz, everything. Tana Rabbanan. Kachi goyim lo nehenim v'lo mayalin. Although you're not permitted to have any benefit from the guy's carbon, but if you do have benefit, you're not over on me'ila. Typically speaking, if you go and you benefit from a carbon in the Beis Hamikdash or anything in the Beis Hamikdash, and the Gemara is going to discuss the difference between Kachi Bedek Habayis and Kachi Kachim, or Kedushas Haguv, Kedushas Damim. If you do benefit, typically speaking, you would have to pay an extra 25% and bring a carbon me'ila, shamila. Over here, since it's a non-Jewish carbon, you're potter. Loi nehenin, you should not benefit from it, but if you do, v'loi ma'alin, there's no isra mila. As we said in the Mishnah, since it's a non-Jewish carbon, so there's no chiyov, there's no isra, pigul, noiser, tummy, you don't get cars. Ve'ein oisin tmura. Tmura is when a person has a carbon, he designated this carbon, a little skinny guy, and then he sees a larger one, a better one. He says, I want this larger one to be instead of the original one. The halacha is that it's also to do so, and if you do, both of them have the same gedusha, but if that one, the original one, is a non-Jewish carbon, and the guy does the tmura, or even a Jew does the tmura, no good, we have a video. Says Gemara, the non-Jew does not bring a carbon nesachim, meaning bring wine, just as is, just the wine, together with the carbon, yes. Let's say he brings the oil, he should bring the nesachim. Aval carbon, ta'on nesachim. When he brings a carbon, he should bring nesachim. Divrei Rebbe Shimon. Or Rabbi Yosi. Royani bekulan lahachmer, says Rabbi Yosi, that's the Rabbi Yosi we had at the end of the Mishnah. No, I'm going to be machmer on everything. Shenemar bohem lashem. So let's go back to the pasuk. In the pasuk that teaches us that a guy could bring a carbon, but at the end it says lashem. Lashem means everything is like the Jewish carbon, and therefore there is an iser pigul. And if the kohen thought of pigul machshava during the shechita and he ate it afterwards, he's chayiv karas. Same for noiser, tuma, and chutz. Now, there's two different categories. This koche mizbeach and this koche bedek habayit. I saw you taking a picture. It's okay. Koche mizbeach is an animal that could be brought as a carbon. It doesn't have any blemishes, no mumim, and it was designated as a carbon. So it's koche mizbeach. But let's say you donate an animal that has a broken bone. It's possible for the mizbeach. So you're donating it for the upkeep of the Beis Hamikdash. The money is for the Beis Hamikdash. Says the Gemara, when do we say that there's no pigul, no isar tome, etc., when it was designated by the goy for the Mizbeach? But if he designated it for the Beis Hamikdash, then there is Me'ilah. Says the Gemara, brand new sugi loy nehenim v'loy mayalin. That you should not benefit from the idol worshiper, the goy's carbon. And if you do, you're not over on Me'ilah. Says the Gemara, the Gomar Me'ila Chet Chet Mitruma. Because we learn out the idea of Me'ila from Truma. The Betruma Ksiv B'nai Yisrael V'lo Goyim. By Truma, there's the halacha that it applies to Jews and not to the Goyim. So in Me'ila, since we have Gzer Shava, the word Cheta and Chet, we compare the two. And so by Me'ila, there's no Me'ila by a Goy. So when a Goy designates a carbon and you benefit from it, you don't have to pay the base of English the extra 25% and bring a carbon. Ben Chayavim Allah of Mishum Pigul Noise V'Tameh. Why? My time. When you have one hekesh, you cannot learn out from one hekesh. Let's say you learn B from A. A teaches B. That's it. It's stuck at B. B cannot go further and teach C. But if you use a kavachomer, yes. So let me ask you a question. Let's say A is tefillin, and from tefillin you learn halacha to tzitzis. Let's say that you need lishma and tzitzis. Now, can I take B and teach C, which is mezuzah? And the answer is yes. Why? Because tefillin, tzitzis, and mezuzah are not kachim. This halacha of not learning from a hekesh to another hekesh is in Mesechtes Zevachim and Menachos and kachim, not in the rest of the Torah. So let's see inside. It says the Gemara, my time. The asi pigul oven menoisar v'asi noisa chilul chilul metuma ubetuma ksib b'nei Yisrael v'leigoy. Let me show you. It's very, very simple. By Tuma, it says the word v'leichalu. So I'm going to learn Noisar, the center one, from Tuma. And I'm going to learn the left one, Pigul, from Noisar. So I'm learning Pigul from Noisar and Noisar from Tuma. So it turns out that I actually learned Pigul from Tuma. Because the only way I know Noisar is from Tuma. And the only way I know Pigul is from Noisar. So Pigul I learned from Tuma. What does it say about Tuma? It says in the bottom, we brought the pasuk, B'nai Yisrael. That the idea of Tuma, of me eating a carbon from, when I'm Tameh, eating a carbon and I'm Chayiv, for that, it's only when it's a Jewish carbon, not when it's a non-Jewish carbon. So the same thing by Pigul. Pigul only applies to Bnei Yisrael and not to the guy. Let's see inside. Dasi Pigul oven menoizer. So the Gemara starts off from the left, from the end. It says the word avoino by Pigul. It says the word avoino by noizer. So I learned Pigul from noizer. And where do I know noizer from? I learned it from Tuma. I'm sorry. By noizer it says the word chilel, and by Tuma it says below yichalalu, it's chilel, and by Tuma it says bnei Yisrael. So maybe I know Pigul all the way from Tuma. We're Tuma ksiv bnei Yisrael v'ligoyim. V'noisim Tmura. My timer. Why can't a guy perform Tmura, take his animal and say, and this animal is instead of the first behema, the first carbon. My timer, the iskash Tmura lemaiser behema, or maiser behema iskash lemaiser dagon. So something very, very similar than we just had on this chart. And let's do it over here. Here we go. So here's the hekesh, meiser to tmura. In Pasuk Lamed Beis it says meiser bakar. It's the meiser of the animals. And in Pasuk Lamed Gimel it says tmura. So that's a hekesh. Because they're so close to each other, I'm going to learn one from the other. The next Pasuk, it says in the same Pasuk, aser to aser, a double lashon. One is talking about the meiser of animals. Another one is talking about meiser dagan, the produce meiser that you give. And by Meiser Behema, it says Bnei Yisrael. So Mamela I know, I'm sorry, by Meiser Dagan it says Bnei Yisrael. And Meiser Dagan I learned to Meiser Behema to Tmura. So let's see how that works. By Meiser Dagan, all the way on the right, it says Bnei Yisrael. By Tmura, all the way on the left, I'm able to learn Tmura from Meiser Behema, and Meiser Behema from Meiser Dagan. So by Kitzer, here, there's arrows actually. I'm learning Tmura from Meiser Behema, and I'm learning Meiser Behema from Dagan. And it says by Meiser Dagan, Bnei Yisrael. You saw how beautifully the words jump. Ask the Gemara, how do I know the center one Meiser Behema? I only know it from Meiser Dagan. So how could the center one teach Tmura, which it itself doesn't have a source? The whole source is from a hekesh, from a limud. Says the Gemara, no, Meiser Dagan Chulin, who the one all the way on the right is not kachim. It's produce. Produce is not a carbon. So Mela, it's ki'ilu. I'm learning directly Tmura from Meiser Dagan. Says the Gemara, that's great if what matters is the source. The Meiser Dagan all the way on the right, it's not kachim, it's chulin. But what if I go by the one I want to learn too, which is Tmura all the way on the left? Tmura is kachim, and it shouldn't be able to learn a hekesh from a hekesh. Oh, in the arrows you could see the word hekesh. Beautiful. You see it's like hekesh from a hekesh. Gewaldig. Ah, Yoshi is great. Says the Gemara. Elo mando amar basar lo medes lino ma'ikle meimar. Says the Gemara. Elo ma'aser behema choiva shein kavu lazmanhu. When do you take ma'aser behema? When you have newborn animals, you have 10. One of them goes to the kohen. But there's no. It's a chayv. You have to do it. But there's no specific time that you have to do it. And the halacha is v'chayv she'ein lazman kavua Yisrael maisu goyim loy maisi. Anything like that, a goy does not bring. Period. Fine. Next sugya. Ve'ein meviim nesachim. A goy does not bring a carbon nesachim all by himself. Tana Rabbanon Ezrach mevi nesachim ve'ein hagoy mevi nesachim. From the word Ezrach, call. Oh, first of all, what is nesachim? Here we go. Beautiful. Oops. Let's do it again. Okay, so that's the Nesachim where he's on top of the Mizbech, he pours the wine into a special hole there, it's the Kli, and it goes down. By the Nesachim it says, Kol Ezrach Yase Kocha Esela. So, Ezrach maybe Nesachim, Ve'ina Goy maybe Nesachim. Yochel Leitei Lasei Tuan Nesachim. So maybe he should never bring wine. Even when he brings the Oila, he should not bring the accompanying wine. Tabaloi Makacha. No, this is how it's done. Oila, you always bring wine. Says Rabbi Yossi, when it comes to a non-Jew, he's just like a Jew. His carbon has the same chumras of pigul, noisar, tuma, chutz. The Gemara explains, Shimon says there's no me'ilah by a guy, and in that me'ilah, there's no me'ilah is by kache mizbeach banat bedekabais. My timer. What's Reb Shimon's reason that there's no milah by a goy? Ki gamra mi'ilah chet mit truma. Do me the truma. The whole mi'ilah you learn from truma has to be similar to truma. What's truma? That when you have produce, you give 2% to the kohen. The dumi the truma has to be similar to truma. The kadisha kedusha zakuf. Truma it itself is inherently kadosh. Ava kedusha is bedekabayis. But when it comes to things that are dedicated to the upkeep of the Beis Hamikdash, Kedushas Damim, it only has monetary Kedusha, not inherent Kedusha, not itself. It itself is not Kaddish, just it has monetary Kedusha. Loi. In other words, there is Me'ilah for the guy when it comes to things that are Kaddish, Kedushas, Bedekabayis. New Sugya. Tan Rabbanon, Dom Shenitma Uzrakai. You have blood, you're about to do the Zrika onto the Mizbeach, and the blood became tamei. You're not allowed to pour it onto the mizbeach. He went ahead. B'shoygeg hurtza. Dam shenidu uzrakai. He went ahead and he did do zrika with it, even though he shouldn't have. It was by mistake. B'shoygeg hurtza. He gets a ritzui. It's a good kapara. What's pshat? So we know that the kohen gadol wears something called a tzitz on his forehead, and that tzitz has the power, that's what it usually accomplishes, is the ritzui, a kapara for something that's tamei. And here's a case of using something that's tamei, even though you shouldn't have, there's a ritzui. Daf mem hey omid beis. So we're talking about blood of a carbon that became tamei. You shouldn't put it on the mizbeach. B'meizid, if you did it by deliberately, you did it loy hurtza, you don't get a kapara. Says Rashi, we're talking about a knas de Rabbanan. Rabbanan penalized him. That what? You don't have to bring another carbon. Just the penalty is that you, the kohen, cannot eat it. Why? Because you shouldn't have poured that blood when it was tummy. But with the raisa, the guy got a good kapara. That's only by an individual. We know the famous concept of tuma hutra b'tzibur. The concept of tuma goes away when the majority of Klal Yisrael are tummy. Now we're making a distinction between a Jew and a non-Jew, and by a guy, b'shoigeg ubemezid loy hurtza. It doesn't matter. Even b'shoigeg, the coin is not allowed to eat from it. Amru Rabbanan Kamed Rapapa Keman, and they said, who could this go according to the like Rabbi Yossi? It doesn't go according to Rabbi Yossi. Why? The Rabbi Yossi. he says there's no difference, there's no distinction between a Jew and a non-Jew. They're all the same. And Memela over here also, why are you telling me by a Jew there's a ratzon, there's a hurtza, and by a non-Jew, when he sprinkles the blood, the tumah, b'shoigig, there's no ritzui. They're the same. No, you could say it goes according to Rabbi Yossi. Shani Osam Makro Lohem Lohem Veloy Legoyim. No, even Rabbi Yossi would admit in this case by blood that became Tameh, since the Torah says the word Lohem by the tzitz, by the pasuk of tzitz, it says Lohem. Lohem means to Klal Yisrael. The Goyim don't have a ritzui from the tzitz. Omali Rabbi Nasan, the Rabbi Papa Elamiato Asher Him. Oh, let me just show you the pasuk real quickly. This is the pasuk by tzitz. V'hoya mitzacharon should be on his forehead, and at the end it says Lohem. Lohem means to Klal Yisrael. As the Gemara, so if so, by Tum also it says Dabel Bnei Yisrael. Haim. The Haim is referring to Bnei Yisrael. So the idea of Tumah, according to Rabbi Yossi, also should not apply to a non-Jewish animal, only to the Jewish one. And he says no. There's no difference. There's no distinction between a Jewish animal and a Goyish carbon. The tzitz, let's see if it's in this pasuk over here. Yeah, l'rotzain lahem. The word right before lahem is l'rotzain. L'rotzain, what does rotzain mean? To have favor by the Rebbeinu Shalom. The Rebbeinu Shalom should favor Klal Yisrael. V'goyim lav b'nei hartzah ninu. The way I see it is that a Jew is the son of the Rebbeinu Shalom. He has that kirva to the Rebbeinu Shalom, whereas the idol worshiper, he doesn't have the same kirva. He might be like a friend, like an acquaintance, but not the same rotzon. You don't have the ritzui, the favor. Dvarim she'ein chayav aleim shum pigul. Says the Mishnah, there are things that you don't, if you eat them. Remember, we discussed the kmitza. The kohen puts his hand in, takes a little bit of flour. That doesn't have a matter. That is the final step. Nothing is going to be matter of that. So memela, there's no pigul on it. So dvarim she'ein chayav aleim shum pigul. But yet, if you leave the kmitza overnight, then you're chayav. Also, what if you are tamei and you eat it? You're chayav also. Chutz min adam. When it comes to the blood, which doesn't have a matter, blood doesn't have a matter. It's the final step. It's the sprinkling on the mizbeach. The dam, as the Gemara is going to explain why, does not have noisar. If you left it over, you're not chayiv a noisar, and you're not chayiv if you are tamei and you ate it. You chayiv anyways, kares, but not for tuma. Reb Shimon chayiv. The dover shedarken lechol. Reb Shimon says, wait a minute, time out. If it's something edible, levine is not edible. Kmitza, the flour, okay, but something that's not edible, you're not chayiv. Avaleitzim alavina v'aktoiris. Wood. Sometimes people, you know that people would bring a carbon, wood as carbon, and every carbon you have to add salt to. So that you bring wood as a carbon here, and bring a piece of plywood to the version, you have to add salt. Chidushim of kachim. We're learning chidushim here every day. But well, it could also refer to the wood that goes on the mizbeach. Vaktoiris. Ein chayav malav. Mishum tuma. Says Reb Shimon, there's no chiyuv of tuma on wood and levina. Zog the Gemara. Taner Rabbanan. Locha yacha lo yu chayav mishum tuma ela al davar shesh lematirin bein laadam bein mizbeach. Perhaps the idea of tuma, that you're tamei, you the human being is tamei, and you go and you eat something. Maybe it's only something that you ate that it has a matter. Something else could allow it to be brought onto the mizbeach or to be eaten. Bein la'adam bein mizbeach, whether you're a human being eating it as a steak or the mizbeach is eating it. V'dinu. L'chari have a kavachomer. Uma pigul shu b'kviyah. Pigul, when you think about eating a carbon or the steak outside of it's a lot of time, it has, what if you do it by mistake? Yeah, you're chayev, a carbon chatas, you're chayev. But it's a kavua. It's only one type of carbon chatas. Ubiyidio achas. And there's one awareness that you're doing pigul. And there's never a heter to do pigul. But the reverse is true in all these three things by tuma. And nevertheless, and the idea is that you are only chayev on something that has a matir, right? The kmitza, you're not chayev, pigul on it. But the mincha, you are chayev. Why? For pigul, because it has a matter. When you put the kmitza on the mizbeach, when you sprinkle the blood, that's the matter for the meat. Tuma, but on the flip side, tuma, shiba oilav yared. Tuma has a different type of carbon. The carbon called oilav yared. It depends how wealthy you are here. If you're very wealthy, you bring an animal. If you're medium, you bring birds. If you're shvachamaisis, then you bring flour. When it comes to tuma, you have to know that you are tame, then you forgot that you're tame, and then you remember again that you're tame. So there's two awarenesses. We know, we discussed it earlier today, that tuma goes away completely when it's betzibur, when the majority of Klal Yisrael is. So certainly you shouldn't be chayav only if it has something that's matter that allows it to happen, whether it's for human consumption or for the mizbeach's consumption. Okay, so you have a special pasuk. You don't learn a kavachomer tuma from pigul. So I think that if somebody's magdish an animal, even though it's not even the meat is not able to go into the mizbeach at all, you should be chayev if you are tomei and eat it. Yikrav, it has to be karev on the mizbeach. But the word yikrav means to get close. What, just by getting close, touching, you're going to be chayev kares for touching? There's no such thing. Yikrav. What does it mean? We're talking about the type of meat that's available to put on the mizbeach. It's what does it mean? It's able to be put on the mizbeach. If it's something that, let's say, zrikas adam, so you put the dam on the mizbeach, now it's able to be put onto the mizbeach. Let's say it doesn't have blood. When you put it into the kli, let's say the kmitza, you put the flour into the kli, the second kli, and that makes it also to eat when you're tummy. Says the Gemara, Ashkechon Tuma. I see a case where I'm eating the kachum when they're tummy. Here we just discussed it. Noisam and Olan. How do I know that when a noisar, this leftover, whatever it is, that doesn't have a matir, how do I know it's also asar? Also chilu tuma. I learned from tuma with the Gzera Shav. So now the Gemara says, wait a minute. Who told you to learn? Here, check out this chart. Givaldik. We have noisar. The Gemara says, how do I know noisar? That if it doesn't have a matter, it's asr. I learned it out from tuma, but I can learn out from pigul. And pigul, we said, if it doesn't have a matter, there's no isser, right? Like the kmitza. Again, you take the kmitza. This has zero matter. That's the end of the station. It's the last stop. There's nothing that's matter it. So if you eat it, with pigul, you're not chayiv. So there's no chiyuv if you learn from pigul, and if you learn from tuma, there is. Noiser in the middle. I can learn from both. The Gemara does a classic thing. If you learn, there's three things that noiser are similar to tuma. Gimel, Zayin, Lamed. Great way to remember it is gezel. But the Gemara asks, but pigul has five things, and if you have five things, you should really learn noiser from the one that's much more. It's more similar because it has five things in common. So that the Gemara is going to answer. What are the three and the five? Mistaber mituma haveli lemelav shekain gozel simin. Gimel zayin lamed. Gimel stands for guf. When it comes to pigul's in the head. It's machshava. But tuma and noisar is in the body of the animal. The animal itself is tummy. The animal itself was left over. Zayin is zrika. There's no zrika by tuma. There's no zrika by noisar. Only by pigul. And finally, chilul. There's no lashon of chilul by pigul, but there is by tuma and noisar. So mela is similar. Other pigul haveli melav shekain hutar. Noisar and pigul are similar. The what? Only tuma is hutra b'tzibur. Noisar and pigul do not have hutra b'tzibur. Tzitz. There's no tzitz meratza. The tzitz is only meratza by tuma, not by noisar and pigul. Tar. They themselves are tar, where tuma is tameh. Bisman, Noiser and Pigel have a clock. It's because of something happened with the time. They were not timely. They stayed overnight. Pigel is a thought about tomorrow. Tum has nothing to do with time. Karev, what? No, value efficient means more. What's karev? That they're puzzle the carbon, but Tommy and Noisar, the 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 carbon itself is not. This is Tommy. Here's the person, the makriv. The makriv is Tommy by Noisar. So the Gemara, value efficient 5 verses 3. 5 is more. Says the Gemara, Levi. So how do I know Noisar? How do you know that Noisar? We're talking about Noisar also. It's a double lashon. Chalalu it's plural. Instead of leyachel v'chalalu, 2 lameds. As kach b'nei Yisrael. B'shnei chilulim hakoz medaber. The Torah is talking about 2 things that become defiled. Echad psul Noisar. You see, so the pasuk is talking about Noisar. V'echad psul tuma. Raboisai. Have a wonderful day.
Merit the schus of spreading Torah throughout the world. Sponsor a shir today. MDYsponsor.com or sponsor at MDYDAF.com.